Welcome to the Empathy Avengers podcast, where we put empathy into action.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Empathy Avengers podcast. We're honored to have with us today Dee Batiste. Desia is a veteran, was an archivist for 10 years with the Army, is now an activist with Blue Tennessee, and has her own podcast, Advocacy Arena. And we are just thrilled to have you here with us, Dee. Thank you for joining us.
Well, I really appreciate the invite, and I'm really looking forward to the topics that you've chosen to discuss. So, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. Let's just start with a little bit more about you and share a little bit more about your background and Advocacy Arena and what you've been doing, what's been going on in Tennessee.
Okay, well, as you said, I am a veteran. I spent a decade in Germany, and part of that was as active duty. I got out of the military there. My branch of service was the Army. I was in a combat support hospital and happened to be serving during the time that they took over the embassy in Iran. And we served that sector. So although we didn't have to go, we were on alert for 3 days, meaning geared up, ready for war in that holding pattern. So this new kind of entry into wars in Iran kind of stirs up some of that stuff. But I lived in 3 different places in Germany and learned a lot about the history, really fell in love with the country. And I also worked as a civilian for Ramstein Air Force Base there. I really, like I said, fell in love with the country and the people and still have friends there. And I came back to the States. I've been a serial entrepreneur at times in my life. I've had my own soap making business and really into natural skincare. I've taught classes for Joann's. I have always been interested in politics and been engaged. But I guess I probably got bit by the political bug when I was working for a staffing agency and representing the company. This one luncheon that we went to was during a mayoral election, and so part of it was hearing the spiel from all of the folks that were running. And I listened, and there was one that I kind of connected to, and that one also happened to be in my community, in my district. I made it a point to go to his office and kind of drill him a little bit further on some of the things that he said. We had a great conversation and walked away. And as I was leaving, he said, I really like your style. And if I'm elected, would you be my assistant? I was like, oh, yeah, sure. I just thought he was blowing smoke. Long story short, he won and he called me to be his assistant. And it was a really, really wonderful, rewarding time. The interesting thing about that is he's a Republican.
You were sort of challenging him, right?
Yes,
Right?
yes. But that's when I understood the importance really of that local involvement and how it helps to really bring civility back into the political discourse, because we live in the same neighborhood, dude.
Yeah.
So, like, don't go voting harm on me because
Yeah.
it's going to be hitting you too. And I knew that he wanted good things. His vision for our city was something that I was aligned with, and I could get behind that. And I didn't care what it's part. Of course, there was this period where he was always trying to convert me, but he didn't. But what he did do was give me a doorway into an opportunity to see the Republican Party. I think it's important to know what your opponents are doing,
Yeah.
how they're thinking, and how they're behaving. I was well received because a lot of it was just around community things. You get to see how authentic people are. You have to be nominated for an organization that he nominated me for, and it's kind of an exclusive one. It's called Leadership Sumner. It is about service, and the first year you are going to every town in your county and you're visiting with lawmakers, with service people like the fire department, the hospital, learning how that town works and who is making it work, and building relationships about community. And then the next year, you have to commit to a year of service in an organization. I served in several because I just like being involved. I did that for a year and then went off into my kind of entrepreneur ventures and have still always been involved in politics. I helped with the Al Gore campaign, so I've had a lot of heartache around politics. Was in the ballroom that night because I worked with the campaign and it was heart-wrenching to go from joy to tears and heartbreak. Fast forward, I worked the election polls in 2016. Again, a very hard, long day that ended in heartbreak. That's my political journey. I'm retired now. I went back to school, became an x-ray tech. I worked for orthopedic surgeons for 10 years, and then probably most recently I spent a decade kind of caregiving, giving that end of life care to my mother and grandmother at the same time. It was a very difficult time, and that is the time in which, a lot of political changes were taking place. I felt again, once, we were able to put them at rest, that it was important that kind of dive back into this. The way that I chose it was during the pandemic. And Twitter was rolling out a new feature, Spaces, and it was just a great way to kind of gather with people. Spaces brought a new kind of interest and purpose because you could engage and hear the authenticity in people's voices. Over time, we built community, and so it was a wonderful place. Eventually, I started hosting my own space, and it was about politics, but initially it was during the pandemic, so it was about people expressing their concerns and their fears and how that was being managed by the government. So naturally it evolved into politics, and again, I realized how essential that tool could be and was. We started building communities, creating fundraisers, educational spaces, bringing candidates in, and basically having a virtual town hall. People would come and ask them questions. So it was just, like I said, a great time. And then someone else bought it.
Yeah.
I still am committed to the work because for me, when I saw how we could come together in this day and time in that way, I just made it a mission to increase civic engagement because that's the answer to all of this. And I believe it starts with people being informed. People have podcasts and these spaces and chats around a lot of different things. I've always been very intentional about the ones that I have and the purpose. That's probably the military in me needing a mission. My mission is to increase civic engagement, and I use a lot of different tools and platforms to do that.
I love that. Yeah, so we have similar missions in that sense. We officially are empathy promoters, if you will, but civic engagement is actually more tangible, like a real thing that people can do to help. So tell us more about Blue Tennessee. What are you actually doing on the ground?
Yes, I choose different things and ways to make an impact because we can all point to the problems and things that we have. I talked about how here in Tennessee we basically had a Republican trifecta for a decade and a half, and it has not made the quality of our life better. Beyond voting or working the polls, I wanted to find a way that I could make a difference and change that, rebalance the power here, because that wasn't always the history. Our state We've always really had a divided government where sometimes the legislature could be all blue and the governor a Republican, but we've always had a balance. And for this past decade and a half, we haven't. There are a lot of reasons for that. And again, like I said, rather just becoming apathetic or surrendering to it, because we've basically been gerrymandered and voter suppression,
Time
voter
out.
disenfranchisement.
They actually tried to kick out the people who the voters had voted in. There were three congressmen, one woman and two men. Was that like a couple years ago?
Yes, I want to say it was 2020 23, because it was the same year that we had a school mass shooting here.
Yeah, they were real vocal about the shooting, and then they were like, "Shut up over there." And it was because they had a supermajority in Tennessee that they were able to pull that bullshit off, right? Help me remember, because I think the like they tried to appeal this decision, but that didn't really work. They really had to just get voted back in. Is that what happened?
Yes, and they were very angry about them being able to get voted back in, and were trying to figure out, like, they contested Justin Jones's trying to get back in, but it didn't work. But when they were not successful, what they did was just continue to find ways to silence them.
Right.
And that's what happens
Yeah.
when everyone's voice isn't heard and represented. That's how I was able to see, just again, at the local level, community wise, how if you're not civically engaged, you lose your voice, you lose your power, and it's very hard to get it back. And that is why Blue Tennessee became a vehicle to write that, and a way for me to get involved. I help with another group of wonderful ladies get it off the ground, because it is part of a larger national organization called Every State Blue.
Mm.
We did a lot of fundraising and awareness, and Trey Crowder helped us with that so that we could meet our goal. We were able to do that with this last election and actually fund candidates. Part of the
Great.
goal is to make sure that there is no Republican that runs uncontested.
Yeah.
Have a Democrat run everywhere. And it's really not about them winning, it's about them fighting everywhere. It's about giving the Democrats who are there someone to represent them, whether or not that they win, but knowing they have a horse in the race, so to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know it's crazy to for me sometimes to realize that, because I have the opposite problem. I'm in Los Angeles, I'm in blue LA, blue California, and I sometimes feel that my vote doesn't have as much of an impact because we know California's going to go for the Democrats, and I know my district for the House of Representatives is going to go. So I mean, I do still vote, but it's sometimes I feel like if you're in a more contested region or contested district, you do have a real voice to make an impact. It's the opposite in deep red states, right? Like I feel bad for people in some districts in Tennessee, I'm sure are just never going to go blue. But I think it's absolutely important to have somebody running. It's probably a thankless position to be in, but you have to have somebody who's speaking to the people who are blue in the district.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it boils down to quality of life.
Yeah,
That's where you go back to the community. And it's like,
sure.
do you want these good things for yourself, for your community? But we've become so polarized, and that's intentional because of this information warfare that we have been under assault from for over a decade now. It has really made it hard for people to find commonality.
Mm,
Again, why I push the community aspect of being able to find that commonality. I feel like things are getting so awful now that actually our life becomes harder, but the ability to find that commonality could become easier. I
Love
see
that.
it as an opportunity.
I lived in Texas for 21 years. Up until about 5 years ago, I moved back to Connecticut. But even during the 2020 election, as polarized as we were, I was able to start some really good conversations with people who were actually still in the cult with the book by Dan Rather, What Unites Us. And that was just a beautiful moment for me to see the connection that we still do have enough in common, our love of this country. Community is the only way we're going to get through it.
We are more alike than we are different. It's always been a belief of mine. I lived in another country. I traveled to many other countries, and I just know that the psyop that has been worked on the country has been very intentional to kind of exacerbate the differences and to make them ugly. And of course, we must admit that there is a white supremacist ethos that is deeply rooted in this country that has been nourished and emboldened. That's what we're kind of fighting against in various ways.
Yeah.
That's why people did not vote for the exceptional Black woman in Kamala Harris. As infuriating as it is, this country is still deeply racist and misogynistic.
You mentioned the Christian nationalism. The word white isn't in that phrase. That's basically what it is. It's white supremacy. And I think the fact that it's hijacked religion is especially awful because people think that they're doing the right thing, going to church, and then they get brainwashed, like Mindy and so many others. I'm an ex preacher's kid. My dad was a Methodist minister when I was a kid, and I was 6 when he left the ministry. So, it's not really part of my identity, but my mom continued to go to church for her whole life, and I became a scientist. So, in that sense, I rejected religion. I don't go to church, but I believe that people are good and that we should have humanity. It doesn't mean just because I don't believe in God or worship God that I don't understand like that what would Jesus do is sort of like a good mantra, like let's be kind to each other. And that's why I'm an empathy avenger.
Yeah.
It's just crazy what's the evolution of religion, the hijackingness of it all.
Yeah.
Yes, and I can relate. I am a PK. I am a preacher's kid.
Hey.
And then my dad became a preacher later in his life. I was also raised in a very religious family and community.
Mhm.
And I had to kind of deconstruct that
Mm,
to be able to live and appreciate that belief system that my ancestors gave me, but develop one that served me better. I'm spiritual.
yeah.
And to satisfy my dad, I belonged to a church, a Methodist church. It used to be United Methodist, but
Yeah, it's interesting. They divided over the LGBT gay marriage.
exactly. And how disappointing was that for me? The reason that they have chosen religion is because it's the core of who we are. If you embrace it at all, it shapes everything about you. How you move in the world, how you view the world. And so they are able to infuse their beliefs and ideology into that religious indoctrination.
Hmm.
People wanting to be good just keep soaking it in, getting more brainwashed. There has always been an issue with this segregated hour. Dr. King spoke to it, saying that, Sunday morning was the most segregated hour
Yeah.
in America. We're not going to solve all of these problems, but to recognize kind of their origins and where they come from is kind of a beginning of solving it, or at least existing it in a better way with the understanding of what exists.
Jim Stewart has now kind of coined, now he's talking more about the brainwashing of MAGA mainly, but I think it applies to the church and in many ways. He's coined the 3 word know, name, and disrupt.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I follow Jim too. I've known him for a while and I just love his writing. Like I tell him, it scares the shit out of me, but it's filled with the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like it because he approaches it from the work
Right.
aspect. So he knows how these things are manipulated. And I like that part of it. He always is able to weave it into like actionable steps. Another reason why I like him because there are a lot of people out here parroting what's wrong. I'm about solutions. And so I love that as harsh as he talks, he does offer solutions. And I think that's important.
Yeah, awareness. I don't think I ever would have said, oh, let's start a podcast, but I think it's important for us to talk about these things. You mentioned spaces, so I gather you're not using spaces anymore.
I switched over to Spoutible. I'm still doing the same thing, but I'm doing it over on the Spoutible platform, which is owned by Christopher Boozy, and it was
Oh.
created when Musk bought X. After the election, I decided that that was going to be it because he had disrupted something, broke it, much like he's done our government now, he and his boys. But he did the same thing to Twitter. We had built communities and we had established tools that were really benefiting a lot of people and the Democrats organizing on it. And he just smashed all of that. I knew that it was not going to get any better. One of my things is, of course, not putting all your eggs in one basket. That's why I kind of do different things on different platforms and in different communities. Every Monday, I've been doing it for like 4 years now, and I call them the Good Trouble Chat. Every Monday at 12 p.m. Central Time, 1 p.m. Eastern on Spoutible.
Another thing you did on Fridays, right? Also on Spoutible?
Yes, the Monday chat is kind of hitting a lot of the top headlines, bringing context to them that doesn't happen in the mainstream media.
Yeah.
On Fridays, what I like to do is, and I call those Dee-Scussions, we do a documentary watch. The reason I've been very methodical about the ones that I'm doing and the order, because I'm using it as a place to have discussions with a lot of my mutuals and community are white people, white men, women. I mean, it's a very, very diverse community, really from across the country and some international ones as well. It's important to have conversations, tough conversations about Christian nationalism,
Mm.
white supremacy, in a way that you can be respectful of one another and where people are open to learning and expanding and attempting to change their behavior. And these documentaries and the discussions help me to do that because the Wilmington coup was a real life historical example of white people in Wilmington, North Carolina being angry that once black men had the right to vote and they merged with poor working white people so that they could gain political power. They gained political offices and the white supremacist people
It-
lost their mind.
oh,
And so basically they ran him out of office. People need to understand, like, that's kind of what's happening now. It's the same kind of thing. He wants to gerrymander Texas.
totally. We just talked about what happened in Tennessee a year ago or 2 years ago. I mean, it's exactly the same kind of thing. Yeah, they just are not going to be satisfied with a diverse community and diverse representation. And we have to have that. That's what the people are in this country. So it just makes me mad.
I know, and it's tough, but that's where we have to start being comfortable with uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
conversations. Sometimes sitting with that discomfort long enough to get past it and go, oh, I see. Sometimes it's about not being defensive
Mhm.
or trying to redirect it or to rewrite it because that is what is being done. And to not be very close minded. I was really appalled at the recent comments by Jillian Michaels. I don't know if you guys
I saw
have
that last
seen it or
night.
heard. She actually, this was because, the top kind of trending story is about them now putting edicts on the Smithsonian
Hmm.
to
Oh,
review their
yeah.
exhibits. And they also have, EOs that they sent out earlier in the year about kind of reporting on exhibits that teach divisive things, basically teach all
Diversity.
history, a lot of black history. And so she said, in agreement, that all we hear is white people bad, white people bad, white people bad. And only 2% of white people owned slaves in America. And then some other stupid shit.
Oh,
It was all white
sorry.
pride. It was a white pride rant. And it made me sick to my stomach, honestly. The fact that it was on one of the biggest mainstream medias.
It was on
Okay,
CNN, right? Michelle.
exactly.
Yeah, that little show they have where that's what they really incite. They want it to be contentious. It's just disgusting because there was a period in my life where I used to be a bit of a fitness buff, and she was someone whose workouts and ethics I kind of admired. We're finding out that a lot of people in their professions, we like what they did, and to find out that they have gone over to the dark side and have been totally just captured.
Yeah,
Their brains
I
have
know.
been hijacked. It's very disappointing. What that tells me, again, as a black person, I that informs me that they're more into their white superiority. Like when you lose all reason, when you are okay with other people being harmed, or you just refuse to
Yeah.
acknowledge the existence of that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's awful. How can white people be more of an ally to black people in this fight?
Well, I would say just basically seeking to be informed, listening to understand, and being intentional about being informed.
Mhm.
Okay, like I know a lot of people, some people get angry because it's like, well, tell me this, and it is a little insulting. Why is it my responsibility to educate
Right.
you? Like a lot of this information is so accessible. It's a shame, but it's very intentional that it's not being taught. But you can seek this information. And when you know that there are people like myself, and I'm not the only one, who are out there providing that context and that information, read it, boost it, amplify it,
Yes.
and just start listening to those voices, seeking out those resources that are providing it, like the Initiative for Equal Justice. I think it's a website that is really kind of all about celebrating and telling that part of our history. Be intentional about being informed about it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. As a white woman who's pretty woke, and I've always been progressive my whole life, but I was naive and ignorant about a lot of things. And certainly it was really the wake up call was when George Floyd was murdered and the entire country woke up, I would say, for at least a minute. I learned how, maternal mortality and just black people in general are disenfranchised with respect to reproductive rights. So just that one issue, it was such a huge thing that I now am even more appreciative that I am still ignorant about a lot of stuff.
There's a quote that I love to read from John Lewis at the end of my Good Trouble chats every week. There's a line in there that it's this, the struggle of a lifetime, getting in good trouble. What I say to my fellow white people, you're learning about these things. That's your work of a lifetime to try to understand that
Mhm.
because, it's a lot. And some of it has been kept from us. So we have to continue to work, for one, to preserve our history. And in some cases, because depending on where we went to school and what we were exposed, rewriting and a whitewashing of it. And if you don't have other members of your family or community correcting that narrative, then you're ignorant about your own people and history as well.
I have been really embarrassed by the whitewashed public school history that I have been given. I didn't learn about Juneteenth until the year 2000 when I moved to Texas. I did not learn about the Tulsa Massacre probably until about 7 or 8 years ago. It is definitely deliberate and there is a lot to learn. And that's actually why I even joined Twitter in the first place, was to answer questions. And my very first thing I asked on there was, is the term historically Black universities, is that racist? And people were very generous and kind, understanding that I've lived in the South half my life, I've lived in the church cult half my life, but they were kind as you are in sharing that knowledge that is a huge missing piece of the puzzle, at least in my mind.
I want to
And I
commend you and thank you for being so open and having those conversations because they're probably uncomfortable for you too. And like, why should you have to educate us ignorant white people? Absolutely. That's ridiculous. But we need educating because our school system didn't do it. I grew up in Southern California and I also did not learn about the Tulsa Massacre or Juneteenth until I was way an adult.
Well, again, ladies, it's very intentional, and this is also, again, deeply rooted in Tennessee history
Mm.
because the United Daughters of the Confederacy was birthed here as well as the Klan, both.
Oh.
So I had to study and learn about our state history, and I knew because of my Black ancestors that there were parts that were not in the books that I was getting in school because I was the Ruby Bridges in my hometown. I was
Mm.
one of three who integrated our schools in my hometown. When I know the history that I was taught and then the history that wasn't, I have to ask myself why. The United Daughters of the Confederacy have always kind of interested me. As I told you, one part of my service as part of Leadership Sumner was the museum. I was on the museum board. I realized that as time came along with them that yes, they put up the monuments and those types of things and they wanted to honor their dead. The South was devastated. They were mourning their loss, but there was something more insidious.
Yeah.
And people don't want to think that about little white Southern ladies, but it very much was. They did not want women to vote. They put a plaque on the Klan's, first headquarters, and they were inspired by the birth of a nation and had a long running campaign fundraiser they wanted them etched onto Stone Mountain. Yes, the Klan. They felt like they were heroes. So this is the state
Yeah.
that I was born in. Not only did they put these monuments and things up, they also were very intentional about demanding that school books change the narrative to vindicate them, to justify them being traitors. Basically, whitewashing. And why do I say that? I mean, it sounds really harsh, but they had active campaigns, and the publishers capitulated because with the newly freed slaves now being able to be educated, they had a larger audience, more people they could sell books to now.
Mm.
So, about money again.
Yeah.
But when you teach a certain thing to a generation of people and then they continue to teach it, that is something that is hard to break. So that's why it is hard for a lot of people, a lot of white people, to believe in some of the things because
Right.
it's just been kind of, as you say, institutionalized in their brains
Yeah.
that this is the way it was. And that's a slow process of undoing it.
Well, similarly, just the word feminist, right? Feminism and feminist has been kind of stigmatized as a bad thing, but it just means equality. So, feminism, diversity, equality, all of that.
Yes, we have to take those things back.
And we'll start with empathy.
That's right. So, Dee, you've told us about working for a Republican mayor in Tennessee, but I know you also have a story about someone in your family who ran for office in Tennessee and did not have a very good experience with the Republicans.
Yeah. My cousin ran for a county commission seat, and the race ended in a tie. Then they denied her a runoff, but it was done in such an illegal way because they closed the session and they allowed the newly elected, all except her seat, commissioners to come on board. They were the ones who got to make the decision around whether or not they would be allowed a runoff. It was truly the most undemocratic process that I have ever seen up close. They would not let members of her community, and mind you, this is the most diverse community in our town. The person she was running against lived in probably the least diverse one, the richest county. My cousin had been there for years, rooted in the community, has her own barbershop, and just very much rooted in the community, and got a lot of people civically engaged to go out there and vote in that diverse community, people who had never voted before. So that's the backstory on that. But when they had to come to the decision, they had meetings secretly between them, and that violated sunshine laws. They were not called out or suffer any consequences for that. And then the new commission members essentially just decided that it wasn't worth them to have a runoff, even though it was the same year that an election was occurring, so it wouldn't have added any cost, and that they had the ability to decide. And so they were going to decide. And they chose the other person.
So they actually just decided the outcome. They didn't say no runoff and the last person keeps their office. They just picked who the one.
They just picked the other opponent. Then, in all of their speeches and tirades, had the nerve to say, "We're not a democracy. We are law and order," and basically saying, we're the law and we're the order. We give the orders." They call themselves constitutional Republicans. For me, it was just a really sad example of what Republicans were willing to do to hold power. County commission is a very powerful seat. And although she would have been the only black person on the commission and the only Democrat, really.
Wouldn't have been able to say the votes of the committee.
Exactly. But what she would have been able to do was to have a seat at the table, to be able to represent her very diverse community, to be able to be firsthand, to hear the things, to know about the things that were going to be affecting their community, to be able to take that back to them. So that's what the people of that community were denied.
They were
awful. Is she going to continue and keep the fight going, or run for office again?
She is, like me, very politically engaged. She did help another candidate. She is going to run again. She might be pushing for a higher seat at this time because one of the state legislators weighed in on gave his opinion about this county commission. She's thinking about, I think, running for a house seat, a state house seat, and she helped another gentleman who ran for a state house seat. He didn't win. Getting people again used to, because they are running against people who are really well known in our community, who have a lot of political sway and family kind of dynasty kind of names. They're giving them some good competition. So I just feel like that steady drumbeat eventually, because as I can visualize that, because we sit on terrain, it's limestone, which is, we have a lot of caves and things. So what it means is just over time, we have a lot of tributaries, but over time it wears through the rock. So We're just going to drip,
Just
drip,
drip,
drip.
drip,
And
erode, and then you'll have the Grand Canyon. No, I'm just kidding.
we have a trifecta here.
Keeps
The
flowing.
governor, the past two governors, and now Marsha Blackburn is trying to run. And she hasn't had a town hall in 7 years. She had one just recently and only chose certain media to be able to hear it. They only can report certain things, like it has to go through her. How do you become a public servant to the people of the state, but not
Not that way.
listen to, hear, or have access to you?
No.
Part of the reason they can operate this way is because they have a trifecta. They have gerrymandered and their voter suppression tools, the disenfranchisement, that they don't have to worry about having enough people vote against them because they have tools for that.
Yeah, I
Infuriating.
guess you're right. It's not just a super majority, it's that you also have the governor and everything. Yeah, that's so shitty. Gerrymandered to death, so we probably don't have to worry about more. There's probably no more ways to gerrymander to get more.
I would have said that about Texas too.
You would think they did something that had never been done in the history of the state before, and that they literally carved up our city. They carved up the city of Nashville.
Yeah, even this new proposed district, if you have looked at the map in Texas, they want to take basically all the black people from Austin and all the black people from San Antonio, and those are like 2 hours apart, and they're going to combine them all in the only Democratic district in that whole region. It's
Get one representative for these very
yeah,
diverse communities, even though they may be black. Sometimes
whatever.
where that community is located can differ on the issues that concern you.
Eventually, instead of actually just redrawing the map, it'll just be by demographics. All the black people in California that are, between these ages will get one representative.
They want to have control and power, and there is nothing that they're not willing to do to ensure it. Now they have a trifecta in the presidency, Congress, and a lot of the judiciary. Thank you guys for inviting me on. I've had a great time. I know I went off on a few tangents or whatever, but it just means you touched on topics that are near and dear to my heart that I like to talk about, and that involves the work that I do for Advocacy Arena. I hope you guys, if you have time, can join us every Monday. We're on Spoutible doing our Good Trouble chat starting at 12 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Eastern, and then on Friday evenings, also on Spoutible, we have Dee-Scussions, and this is to dive deep into certain topics, and we do a little bit of a documentary watch or film clips, and we have a Q&A, and that is on Fridays at 8 p.m. Central and 9 p.m. Eastern time. I'm also on Substack. I also do a bi-weekly live. It's called Fired Up Friday with Candidly Tiff.
Yeah.
She's a social media influencer who's very politically savvy and engaged. So please look for me, Advocacy Arena, anywhere you listen to podcasts, and on Twitter, Blue Sky, Substack, and Spoutible.
I am really excited to find you on Spoutible and join those too, because I still have a lot to learn and I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you so much, Dee, for joining us today. And thank you, everyone, for again being a part of the Empathy Avengers podcast, where kindness is your superpower and empathy saves the day.
The Empathy Avengers, where we put empathy into action.